Good evening, all, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. Tonight, we plunge into the heart of darkness, exploring tales where the familiar comfort of the woods dissolves into something far more sinister. What if the greatest fear isn't what you see, but what you can't see, lurking just beyond the tree line, leaving behind only chilling silence and missing time? These are the stories of large, mysterious creatures. Encounters so harrowing they shatter the very foundations of reality for those who experience them. My dad never believed in the paranormal. No ghosts, no aliens, no Bigfoot, none of it. He was a practical man, raised in the Missouri woods, lived life rooted in what he could see, hear, and touch. That's why I'll never forget the look on his face when he finally told me this story. He didn't speak of it until I was grown, and even then, his hands trembled just recalling it. I'd never seen my dad scared before. Not like that. This happened back in 1960 during one of his many late-night coon hunts. He and a close buddy, another seasoned woodsman, had taken their well-trained hounds to a small conservation area about 5 miles from the house. It's a peaceful stretch of land in the daytime, but at night, it becomes something else entirely. They let the dogs loose and sat on the tailgate of the truck, listening to them work the woods. Eventually, the dogs treed a coon, and the men followed their barks through the undergrowth. They leashed the dogs, praised them, and were turning to head back when something changed. The dogs, calm and focused moments before, suddenly dropped their tails and began to whimper. My dad's biggest male hound, a dog that had been through dozens of hunts and was afraid of nothing, started shaking. Then he yanked hard, broke free of my dad's grip, and took off into the woods, whining like a pup. Then they heard it, a low, guttural growl, unlike any animal they'd encountered before. It wasn't a bobcat, it wasn't a bear, and it definitely wasn't human. My dad said it was a deep, bone-vibrating growl that didn't seem to come from one place, but all around them. Then came heavy, deliberate footsteps circling them. Now, these were 2 men who knew the forest better than most people know their own homes. They were armed, experienced, and did not scare easy. But whatever this was, it stayed just outside the beam of their headlamps. Every time they turned, they caught nothing, just shadows and a crackle of brush. Then came the chattering. He described it as a kind of whispered mutter, fast and erratic, like someone talking to themselves in a language that wasn't meant to be heard. It circled with the footsteps, stalking them, intelligent and watching. That was when my dad drew his gun and fired 2 shots into the air. The sound exploded through the trees, and then everything went dead silent. No wind, no insects, just this eerie, unnatural stillness pressing in on them. They didn't wait. They bolted and made a straight line for the truck. When they got there, my dad's big male hound, the one who ran, was already waiting for them. He was curled under the tailgate, trembling like a leaf. My dad said the other dogs were cowering, tails tucked, some even trying to climb into their laps. That alone was chilling. These were hunting dogs, born and bred for rough conditions, but they looked absolutely broken. Then they checked the time. What should have been 30 to 40 minutes at most had somehow taken over 2 hours. Neither man could account for it. They hadn't wandered, hadn't gotten turned around. The trees had been close. There was no way they were out there for that long. But the clock didn't lie. He said they never told anyone, not a soul, only each other. My mom told me after he passed that he came home pale as a sheet, a man who had faced down wild animals, storms, even armed strangers in the woods. And that was the only time she'd ever seen him truly shaken. He told me once before he died, "I don't know what was out there. I just know it wasn't supposed to be. Whatever stalked us in those woods that night, It wasn't animal. It wasn't human. And it sure as hell wasn't afraid of two men with guns and a pack of dogs. What could make seasoned outdoorsmen so terrified that they run without looking back? And could moments of lost time be more than just a trick of the mind? From the disorienting fear of lost time, we move to a different kind of terror, where the vastness of nature hides something impossibly large. This happened 2 summers ago in the Grand Tetons. Harry, my husband, a seasoned outdoorsman with a military background, was eager for my first real wilderness trip. Just the two of us, 25 miles, completely off-grid. This place is spectacular, but not for the faint of heart. It's prime grizzly territory. Those big grizzly country signs posted every few miles didn't exactly ease my nerves. We were a mile into the hike, struggling up the relentless incline, both of us drenched in sweat and panting under 40-pound packs. You're supposed to make noise to avoid startling bears, but we were too winded to talk. About an hour in, the trail began leveling off. A fast-moving stream ran to our left. That's when I noticed the silence. It dropped on us like a blanket. No birds, no wind, not even a buzzing fly, just the stream. I caught Harry's eye, and I could tell he noticed it too. In the wild, silence is rarely a good sign. I was a few paces ahead when I crested the hill and froze. 10 feet in front of me, dead center in the trail, sat a massive grizzly. It hadn't seen Harry yet. I was too terrified to speak, so I started flinging one arm wildly behind me, trying to get his attention. When Harry caught sight of the bear, he acted instantly, pulled me behind him, and began yelling, not just yelling, bellowing, military drill sergeant style. His voice thundered through the trees. The bear stood up, dropped to all 4 legs, and began walking straight towards us. And then we heard it. A crack from deep within the woods to our right. A branch snapping, and the grizzly whipped its head towards the noise, hesitated for a split second, and bolted towards the stream like it had just seen the devil itself. A second crack ran out, closer this time. Harry muttered something about falling branches, but I could hear the tension in his voice. We picked up the pace, fast walking up the trail to put distance between us and whatever had spooked that bear. My skin crawled. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, and Harry stops in his tracks. I turned and saw it, too, down where we'd have been standing just moments before. Something large moved through the trees. At first, it looked like another bear, dark brown and shaggy, but it was huge, at least 3 times bigger than the grizzly. It had its back to us. Then it stood up. It rose impossibly tall, like a shadow peeling itself from the woods. The shape was wrong, too. Not a bear. Not any animal Harry or I had ever seen. Just a colossal, dark mass that shouldn't have been there. We ran. I don't remember making the decision. My body just sort of took over, and I sprinted behind Harry, heart hammering in my chest, breath coming in gasps, heavy footfalls pounding the ground behind us, thudding in sync with our own. We didn't look back. Eventually, the footsteps faded. I was shaking and nearly in tears. Harry tried to calm me down, insisting it was all extremely unusual, that bears almost never behaved this way, but I could tell he was rattled too. What kind of force could instill such a primal dread in a creature as fearsome as a grizzly? Back at the ranger station, we'd filed our route before the trip. According to the footprints, we'd been following a ranger on horseback that had passed through that day, but we'd been out for 2 full days without seeing a single other person. Harry's headlamp wouldn't work. Its batteries were drained. It was our only light source. The wind howled, drowning out even our own voices. It was freezing. We finally found a place to set up camp at 9 p.m., a weird clearing shaped like a bowl. To lighten the mood, Harry began playing some music on his speakers, but the way the music echoed back at us made it worse. distorted, ghostly. And then came the silence. No music, no wind, no insects, just that dead hush. The same suffocating quiet we'd felt before the first bear encounter. We turned off the speaker and crawled into the tent. And just as we settled in, the cracks started again, deep thudding noises beyond the tree line. Not echoes, not wind, but a thud. It shook the ground beneath us, and then another thud. Closer. We both froze. We didn't sleep. Didn't even unzip the tent until sunlight poured through the seams. When we finally crawled out, the first thing we smelled was urine. Someone had pissed on the dead fire pit. The coals were still warm, and that's when we saw footprints. Dozens of them, bare feet circling the tent, and handprints smudged, muddy, and smeared across the nylon. All human-sized. Grizzlies are dangerous, but they're not the scariest things in the backcountry. Not even close. I'm glad to say that we made it back without further issues, but it was one of the most harrowing and horrible experiences of my life. And as you can imagine, I haven't been keen to go hiking in the deep woods again since then. Sometimes, the fear comes not from being chased, but from the unsettling certainty that something ancient, something other, knows you're there. Consider the story of a hermit and his strange visitor. My grandpa had a hunting buddy back in the 72nd who was honestly a bit of a hermit. This guy lived way out in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, deep within the Cascade Mountains. It was so remote that there was no running water, no electricity, and not a single paved road for miles. His cabin was a strange, eerie structure perched on top of a steep mountainside. It was built high on stilts, like it was trying to stay above something unseen in the forest below. The stilts raised the cabin at least 10 feet above the ground, and extending from the base of those stilts was a narrow balcony, a precarious ledge with no stairs nor ladder. Nothing to climb up or climb down except sheer drops on every side. Just that wooden platform jutting into the open air, very exposed and vulnerable. Grandpa swore this man wasn't the type to spin stories. He knew him well enough, and he was as honest and straightforward as they came. Grandpa himself wasn't one to buy into tall tales or ghost stories. But what happened that night left him shaken. They had spent the day hunting, tracking through thick brush and cold mountain air, and now the evening was setting in like a heavy blanket. Inside the cabin's single, roughly 300 square foot room lit only by a small oil lamp, the two men sat quietly, catching their breath and sharing the silence that only close friends can share after a hard day. The air smelled of damp wood, smoke, and the sharp tang of dried jerky hanging from a beam. Then, out of nowhere, the hermit looks straight at my grandpa and with eyes dead serious and no hint of a joke says, "Sir Scotch is in the woods. You gotta be careful if you're out at night." Grandpa laughed, half in disbelief, half amused, thinking it was just one of those old local legends, some story to spook the visitor. But the man's expression didn't budge. It was like a warning carved into his face, as if this was the most ordinary thing in the world. And this was just a simple fact. He stood up and gathered a few pieces of fruit, some stale bread, and strips of jerky, piling them carefully into a bowl. Then he went outside. Grandpa followed quietly behind, watching as the hermit carried the bowl out onto that narrow balcony, the one with no stairs and no way to climb up. He set the bowl right on the edge, balanced precariously above the forest floor. "It'll be gone by morning," he said flatly. And then, with nothing more, they retired to bed. The cabin's single room felt heavier after that. Grandpa settled into a cot near the window facing the balcony, and every creak of the mountain amplified the thick mountain silence. Hours later, deep in the black night, Grandpa was jolted awake. At first, it was just a soft rustling, subtle and strange, like the forest itself was breathing in a strange rhythm. and it was just outside the window. Or was it the forest? He got up, heart pounding, and carefully crept towards the window. He squinted, and outside, the bowl was empty. Then, and this is the part he still can't shake, right at the edge of the balcony, he saw it. 4 huge, thick fingers, long and hairy, resting on the wood before disappearing into the shadows. These fingers were massive, larger than any human hand, and the hairs were dark and coarse. Grandpa froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The forest was deathly silent again, but in that moment he felt eyes burning into him from the darkness beyond the cabin. The next morning, the hermit's usual calm was gone. He wouldn't speak about it, just nodded grimly when my grandpa mentioned the empty bowl. What ancient intelligence demanded such a tribute? And why? After that night, Grandpa refused to hunt in those mountains again. The feeling of being watched, the unshakable presence stayed with him for years. That night, my grandpa met something he never wanted to see again, lurking just out of sight, but almost close enough to touch, and I think it shook him to his core. Sometimes, the encounters are less about a fleeting glimpse and more about an oppressive presence, a test of will against the unknown. In the unforgiving wilds of Siberia, even hardened soldiers can be reduced to quivering fear by a named, yet unseen, entity. My family is Russian. Both my parents are from Siberia. About 5 years ago, I had a conversation with my dad that started off normal, but soon veered into something unexpected. I asked him why he believed in Yetis. This surprised me because my dad isn't the kind of man who believes in ghosts, aliens, or anything supernatural. He's a practical, no-nonsense type. But Yetis, he told me he's convinced they're real. He sat up straight, cleared his throat, and began sharing his story. When my dad was in his 20s, he served in the military. He was stationed at a place called Sputnik, a small village close to the Russian border with Norway. It's remote, harsh, and surrounded by dense forests and rivers. In that military camp, all the heavy-duty equipment and supplies were stored far away from the soldiers, deep inside the forest in warehouses built to be isolated from human activity. One night, a group of 10 men, including my dad, were assigned to restock one of these warehouses. It was grueling work, loading trucks with heavy ammunition and gear. They set off late, but the journey took longer than expected. They got a flat tire on the rough dirt roads. When they finally reached the warehouse near a small city on the banks of the river, it was already pitch black. The only light was the faint shimmer of stars overhead, filtered through a cold, heavy sky. They decided to stay overnight. The men were exhausted and needed to rest to do the heavy lifting the next day. There was a dugout nearby, a simple shelter with a sod roof covered in grass. They all laid down on the wooden floor inside, expecting to quickly doze off. But for some reason, my dad couldn't. Something felt off. He stayed awake, lying there in the dark, listening. When he glanced around, he realized he wasn't the only one lying awake. Every single man had his eyes open, staring at the ceiling or into the darkness. That feeling of unease was thick in the air, a creeping discomfort, like the forest itself was watching. And after a while, it turned into a mild but gnawing fear. Then it started a heavy thumping on the sod roof. At first, just a few uncertain footsteps. Then, heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was walking above them. The roof creaked under the weight. Each step echoed, reverberating through the thin wooden beams. The noise wasn't random, it was unmistakable. The sound of a large creature pacing slowly and circling. Hearts started pounding. The men's breathing became rapid and shallow. One of them began hyperventilating, his breath coming in ragged gasps. My dad said he could feel the vibrations in his chest, like the thumping was shaking his very insides. Then one of the soldiers passed out from sheer terror. Through the dim light, someone dared to open his eyes and peek outside. What he saw was a shadow, a massive silhouette, looming near the edge of the dugout. It didn't come inside, but it watched them, silent, immense. Eventually, the footsteps stopped and the creature disappeared into the darkness. Only then did the men allow themselves to relax and drift off to a restless sleep. The next day, my dad's friend asked a local about the strange event. The local said it was nothing unusual in these parts. In fact, he gave the phenomenon a name, one which my dad never remembered. What force could instill such a primal dread in trained military personnel, reducing them to quivering fear? Remember, this was during the Soviet era, a time when belief in spirits or anything otherworldly was condemned as superstition. Religion was banned, and people who even talked about ghosts or demons were looked down on. My dad and his comrades were elite soldiers, deeply committed to the state ideology, strong, practical men who believed only in what they could see and touch. For all of them to be struck so deeply by the experience, to be paralyzed with fear in the middle of the Siberian wilderness, it's something my dad still can't explain. He told me the story like it was yesterday, pale-faced and serious. Not a ghost story or a myth, but a memory ingrained deeply into his mind. That night in the forest, something came close enough to touch them. Something enormous, ancient perhaps, and it left a mark that no soldier could forget. From the unsettling silence of the Missouri woods to the colossal, ground-shaking presence in the Tetons, the ancient, watchful entity in the Pacific Northwest, and the raw, primal fear that gripped hardened soldiers in Siberia, these are but a few glimpses into the chilling reality that our familiar woods might harbor unfamiliar terrors. Each story, a testament to encounters that defy explanation, leaving behind shattered perceptions and lingering questions about what truly lies just beyond the veil of our understanding. As unsettling as these encounters with unseen forest giants are, what happens when the creature lurking in the shadows begins to mimic something human, blurring the lines between known and unknown? Imagine seeing something that looks almost human, but is fundamentally wrong. A shadow that moves with unnatural intent, a whisper that chills you to the bone. What then? Tonight, we step from the colossal and unseen to the unnervingly familiar, exploring encounters with entities that possess disturbing humanoid characteristics, often exhibiting intelligent stalking behavior or unnatural movement. These are the stalkers in the dark, blurring the line between man and monster. Our first story brings us to mid-November, 2 years ago. The narrator was 17, stuck in that strange limbo between being a kid and almost an adult. Winter had slammed in hard, dumping snow everywhere after a brutal storm that had shut everything down for days. Like most nights, they were out with no real plan, just wandering, doing the dumb kind of late-night adventures only people their age could get away with. There were 7 of them, slipping through fences, ducking into the woods. Eventually, they found themselves on a snowy trail near the ocean. Everything was dead quiet. No cars, no wind, not even the distant hum of life. The snow was perfect, untouched, like a thick white blanket stretched over the world, only their footsteps marring it. That's when they saw the shed. It sat alone in a clearing, framed by tall, skeletal trees, abandoned, paint peeling like old scabs, windows fogged and cracked. Of course, they had to check it out. The narrator and Julian were the first to step up. The door was stuck. Logan, Dylan, and Josiah caught up, while Bobby and Carlos lingered nervously by the trail. Dylan managed to slide open a side window, squeezing in first. followed by Logan. Josiah was halfway through when everything changed. The narrator and Julian turned back towards the shed, and there it was. Not a dog, not a man, but something caught in between. It had a human-like shape, but was all wrong. Pale, matted fur around its head, long pointed Doberman ears, and dark eyes that reflected no light. It just stood there at the tree line, silent and unmoving, watching them. Julian froze, his voice cracked, half laughing, half panicked. "Oh, a dog." But the narrator saw it too. That was no dog. Josiah wriggled backward out the window and bolted. Logan, seeing their faces, didn't even look. He just hurled himself through the window like he was dodging a bomb, screaming, "Dude, that ain't no dog!" Then he vanished into the woods. Dylan, stuck halfway through the window, scrambled inside, kicked the shed door open, and sprinted into the night. The narrator and Julian ran too, laughing because that's how they dealt with fear. They laughed and screamed like maniacs as they tore through the snow. Julian slipped face first into the powder, still laughing until he looked back at the shed. He froze. He shot up and ran faster than the narrator had ever seen, blowing past Bobby and Carlos. It was like his life depended on it. There was no flashlight, just the eerie glow of the cloudy sky, brownish and thick above the snow. Logan's group gone, lost deeper into the woods. They finally regrouped at the tunnel under the bridge, their usual hideout, using dying phone screens and lighters for light. Inside, Dylan lit a lighter and Logan snapped, "You moron!" They sprinted for the other side. Later, back at Logan's house, the adrenaline wore off. Julian sat silent and trembling. The others hadn't gotten a good look, but the narrator and Dylan swore up and down they saw something, and it wasn't a damn dog. A year later, Julian, Bobby, Carlos, and the narrator went back. The shed was renovated, bigger, repainted. Whatever had been there that night, whatever watched them, it was gone with the snow. But that night lives rent-free in their heads. What if the unsettling feeling that you're being watched isn't just paranoia, but a silent, intelligent presence mirroring your every move? The narrator's encounter didn't end there. Later that very same night, driving away from their boyfriend's house, they saw a pair of glowing eyes about 50 feet away. The boyfriend thought it might be a bunny, but when he turned the headlights on it, it didn't look normal. Too big for a cat, too small for a deer or pig. Any wild animal would have run from the light, but this one didn't. It inched towards them, sitting down after every step it took. Its shoulders looked wrong. It resembled a dog, but it wasn't. The way it moved wasn't natural. It had glowing yellow eyes and a black, slick, almost shiny coat. Its body looked slightly contorted, like it was walking in a strange, twisted way. This happened about 4 times before they drove off in fear. The narrator had left their home gate open when they left earlier, as their disabled grandparents were asleep. The driveway was 150 yards long, but when they returned, the gate was shut. Could something that looks almost human but is fundamentally wrong also exhibit such unnerving intelligence and the ability to affect your surroundings, leaving you questioning your sanity? From this uncanny stalker, we move to a different kind of humanoid, one so alien in its appearance it defies explanation. In the early 2002, deep in the Rocky Mountains, the narrator, then 14, and their friend Adam found themselves far from civilization, camping with family. On the third night, around 3 a.m., they snuck out for a night exploration, armed only with flashlights and overconfidence. About 15 to 25 minutes into their hike, a creeping unease clawed at the narrator's mind. At first, they ignored it, but eventually, they stopped. "Hey man, maybe we should head back. Something just feels off." Adam scoffed. "Oh, come on. Don't be a baby. We barely got started." Against better judgment, they pushed on. Another 10 minutes passed, the trees around them growing denser. Then, as the narrator's flashlight flickered across a small clearing, they saw it. A figure. A tall, dark shape standing at the edge, barely visible. Their breath hitched as they focused the beam. It had impossibly long, thin legs, a distorted body, and most disturbingly, no arms. The way it stood there, motionless, yet undeniably aware of them, sent ice-cold terror surging through their veins. "Adam," the narrator whispered harshly, "do you see that?" He followed their gaze. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then, as if acknowledging their presence, the thing shifted. Not a step, not a lunge, just the slightest, most unnatural movement. That was all it took. Pure instinct took over, and they bolted, hearts pounding, crashing through the underbrush. They didn't care about the branches slicing their legs or the rocks. They just ran faster than they ever had in their lives. By the time they reached camp, lungs burned, legs were a mess of scratches and blood, hands shaking so badly they could barely undo the tent zipper. They didn't even try to return to their own tent. Instead, they scrambled into the parents' tent, breathless and trembling. Their parents woke up instantly, demanding to know what had happened, but neither of them could form the words to explain. For the rest of the trip, they refused to sleep alone, too terrified to risk another encounter. To this day, the narrator doesn't know what they saw. It could have been a trick of the light, an animal distorted by shadows, or maybe it was something else entirely. If you were there, what would you do? Would your mind try to rationalize it, or would instinct take over, compelling you to flee from something so fundamentally wrong? The line between man and monster blurs, but which is more terrifying? Our final encounter in this segment delves into a realm where the unknown isn't just seen, but actively asserts its presence, sometimes with chilling, intelligent intent. A few years back, the narrator and their wife were on a road trip through Shiprock, New Mexico, visiting friends who were deeply immersed in paranormal investigation. Over dinner, they swapped stories of Bigfoot and strange lights. The narrator, fueled by curiosity, told them straight up they wanted to go out and look for a skinwalker. Really look, just once. The friends, most of whom were Native American, hesitated. When it comes to skinwalkers, they don't take it lightly. One finally agreed to take the narrator out the next evening. So, the next night, they drove for over an hour deep into the desert on narrow dirt roads. The sun dipped low, and soon they were swallowed by a darkness that felt ancient. They stopped in a place known locally for skinwalker activity, a place avoided by generations. The friend killed the engine, and they just sat there, listening. At first, it was just the typical night sounds. Wind, the dry rattle of insects, crickets chirping, loud and aimless. The friend spoke of recent sightings, voices mimicking loved ones, animals with human eyes, shapes that moved like they shouldn't. An hour passed. Then he said something that stopped the narrator cold. "Get out the truck." The narrator thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He wanted the narrator to step out, walk a few feet in front of the truck, and just listen. Said he'd flip the lights on if anything happened. The narrator had a weapon, but knew the story's bullets wouldn't stop them, unless they were blessed and dusted with special white ash. Still, curiosity overruled caution. The second the narrator touched the handle, something changed. The night didn't just get darker. It felt thick, suffocating, like the darkness itself had become aware of them, taking control. The temperature dropped so fast, goosebumps prickled their skin. All the sounds of nature, the crickets and critters, were gone. Everything had been alive a minute ago, and now it was silent. And just as the door was swinging open, foot hovering inches from the dirt, they heard a whistle right next to them. It wasn't coming from outside the truck. It sounded like it came from inside the cab. The narrator froze, blood running cold. They spun around, ready to catch their friend pulling a joke. But he wasn't moving. He'd gone pale, staring straight ahead. The whistle came again. Something was out there or in there with them. The narrator started yelling his name, shaking his arm. He blinked, twitched like he was waking from a trance, and sprang into action. He turned the engine on, slammed the headlights on, and they both jumped out with flashlights drawn, sweeping the area. Nothing. Not a sound, not a track, not a whisper of what had been there. But he was rattled, and when a Navajo man who spent his whole life surrounded by this stuff says it's time to leave, you leave. So they did, without another word. The very next night, still undeterred, he and a few others took the narrator out again, this time to look for Bigfoot near Shiprock Mountain. This felt less ominous, but still heavy. After hours of walking, they found what they called a Bigfoot nest, a cleared-out den packed with dozens of clean-picked deer bones. As they examined the nest, they heard a yelp not from a coyote, but a mountain lion, deep, long, and guttural. They spun around, flashlights scanning, but saw nothing. The other two did. Movement just above them on the ridge, something large and humanoid. They were scared to even draw their weapons. 10 minutes later, they started hearing footsteps from all around them. They circled, closing in. No matter where they pointed their lights, they couldn't see what was making the sounds, but it was there, getting closer, less cautious. That's when they bailed. Even now, the narrator thinks about the whistle, the darkness, the weight of something you can't see standing just outside the beam of your flashlight. Could these phenomena be merely misidentification, or something far more ancient and intelligent, preying on our deepest fears? Are they intelligent entities that understand our movements, our fears, perhaps even our thoughts? The question haunts. What if the uncanny humanoid is not just observing, but learning? These stories, from the pale, Doberman-eared stalker that seemed to manipulate its surroundings to the armless figure in the Rockies, and the chilling, unlocatable whistle of Shiprock, illustrate the profound psychological impact of encountering entities that mimic the human form, yet are fundamentally wrong. They evoke a primal fear, forcing witnesses to question their sanity, their understanding of reality, and what truly lurks in the shadows. From silent, stalking humanoids to creatures that actively try to communicate, our journey now takes a profound turn. What happens when the unknown dares to make its presence felt, not just with a chilling presence, but with a primal, perhaps even intelligent, intent? What if the legends aren't just myths? What if a creature from the deepest folklore stood before you, not just observing from the shadows, but trying to speak, or leaving undeniable, colossal proof of its ancient, formidable presence, proof that shakes the very ground beneath your feet? When I was just a little kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old, my family embarked on what promised to be an idyllic camping trip, deep in the untouched heart of the Utah mountains. I remember the drive stretching on forever, the car winding up and up treacherous, narrow roads, until we finally reached what felt like the very summit of the world. There, nestled at the highest point, was a small, crystal-cold mountain lake, cradled in a natural pocket of towering pines and stark, ancient rock. That's where we pitched our tents, convinced we had found our own slice of serene wilderness. It should have been perfect. The panoramic views were nothing short of breathtaking, the air clean and sharp, biting with the scent of pine. The silence was absolute, a profound hush broken only by the gentle sigh of the wind whispering through the trees, a silence that usually felt peaceful, but that night, It took on an unsettling weight. My parents, my uncle, and I were down by the shore that evening, fishing. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, purple shadows across the water. While my grandparents and older brother moved about the camp behind us, their voices muted by the growing twilight, I was just a small figure, patiently casting my child-sized line, dreaming of catching the biggest trout, when everything abruptly, irrevocably changed. My dad was the first to see it. Across the shimmering surface of the lake, perhaps 100 yards away on the opposite shoreline, stood a massive, motionless figure. It was humanoid in shape, yes, but profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. Covered from head to toe in thick, matted brownish-black hair, it stood impossibly tall, easily 8 feet, perhaps even more, a colossal silhouette against the fading light. Even from that significant distance, its sheer size, its overwhelming, undeniable presence felt immense, oppressive. It felt like it was studying us, every movement, every breath. At first, my dad, ever the pragmatist, thought it was a prank. Maybe some local in a costume, trying to scare unsuspecting campers. He yelled something across the water. I don't remember the exact words, only the sharp, desperate tone. But I will never, ever forget how it responded. It let out a sound that chills me to this day. Not a roar, not an animal call, not even a human shout. It was a high, sharp, almost garbled screech, a bizarre, alien form of language. But it was language. It had cadence, a rhythm, a clear sense of purpose. Whatever it was saying, it sounded like it meant something, like it was actively, deliberately trying to communicate with us. It felt utterly, terrifyingly alien. In an instant, everyone was staring. My grandparents and older brother, drawn by the commotion and the unnatural sound, had come down to the lake. Even our usually boisterous family dog had gone rigid. His ears perked, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest as he fixed his gaze on the thing across the water. And then, my parents, in a moment of baffling, perhaps desperate curiosity, began to mimic the sound back. They tried to repeat the strange guttural vocalizations it had made. And, astonishingly, it responded. Every time they echoed its bizarre speech, it answered back, a strange, chilling conversation unfolding across the silent lake. This went on, back and forth, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few surreal minutes. It was the weirdest, most disorienting moment of my entire young life. I remember the wind suddenly picking up, the tall pines swaying rhythmically, the way all of us just stood there, speechless, our breath held captive, watching this impossible exchange, a conversation none of us could possibly understand. And then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it moved. It turned, its massive frame pivoting with an unnerving grace, and bolted into the dense forest like it had an urgent, unseen appointment. Still upright, on 2 powerful legs, but it moved with an inhuman speed that left us utterly stunned. My dad, a seasoned outdoorsman who could judge animal speed in a heartbeat, later estimated it was running close to 25 to 30 miles an hour. He'd never seen anything like it. Of course, my older brother, my grandpa, and our dog, in a burst of naive courage, did the smartest thing they could think of. They chased it. They made it to the other side of the lake remarkably quickly, following the exact direction the creature had vanished in. I stayed behind, clutching my little fishing pole, my small mind reeling, trying desperately to make sense of what had just happened. My reality irrevocably altered. When they returned, they didn't have much to show for their brave pursuit. Just a single, unsettling clump of long, coarse black hair they'd found snagged in an old, rusted barbed wire fence. Could have been from a bear, they reasoned. But we all knew, deep down, it could have been from something else entirely. We should have packed up and left immediately, but we didn't. We stayed that night, right there in our tents on the shore of that now haunted lake. The wind howled relentlessly all night long, and no one really slept. Every twig snap, every rustle of leaves, every single gust of wind had us on edge, our nerves frayed. Even the roaring campfire seemed to shrink, casting smaller, dimmer light, as if it couldn't hold back the encroaching, ancient darkness. To this very day, I often think about that night, what that creature wanted, and why it tried to communicate with us. The most unsettling part, though, is that in Utah, stories like this aren't even rare. Could these colossal, articulate beings be remnants of a forgotten past, a hidden branch of humanity, or something else entirely? Something so profound it redefines our very understanding of intelligence. I urge you, share your theories in the comments below. What do you think was out there? About a decade ago, when I was 14, my best friend and I had made it a sacred summer ritual: fishing, nearly every single day. We didn't have a car or any easy way to get to our beloved secret spots, so we'd set off on foot, trekking for an hour, sometimes even an hour and a half, through dense, whispering woods and sprawling mossy bogs. Our ultimate destination was always a secluded network of small, winding rivers we affectionately called the Steedles. These narrow streams, no wider than 5 feet, meandered through the heart of the forest, eventually spilling their clear waters into a huge, quiet, almost mirror-like lake. The rivers themselves were shallow and pristine, their beds revealing every pebble and ripple, making them perfect for hopping effortlessly from bank to bank. An exhilarating part of the journey for kids our age. We knew every bend, every submerged log, every hidden fishing hole along the way. But on what would be our very last trip there, something happened that shattered our innocent perception of those woods forever. The air that particular day was thick and heavy, with an unspoken tension that settled on our skin. Suddenly, our casual amble turned into a startled halt as we stumbled upon something deeply unsettling: a large, haphazard pile of animal bones. They were bleached stark white by the sun, scattered across the forest floor, and clearly gnawed on by smaller forest creatures. At first, we both froze, our young minds struggling to comprehend the sight. After a long moment, we rationalized it, assuming perhaps a hunter had field-dressed their game there. It wasn't entirely unheard of, especially in such a remote area. We kept moving, but our steps were now slower, more cautious, our senses on high alert. Then, we reached the edge of the riverbank. The water, as always, was crystal clear, and there, right in the center of the riverbed, etched as if into the very stone, was a footprint. A huge footprint. It was unmistakably a bare foot, toes clearly visible, splayed and distinct, each impression precise and chilling. It was a left foot, utterly enormous, far, far bigger than any human foot I'd ever seen or imagined. The shallow, clear water magnified it, making it appear even more gigantic, more otherworldly, a primal stamp on the riverbed. I called my friend over, my voice a strained whisper, eager, perhaps even desperate, to show him this impossible sight, to confirm what my eyes were telling me. As I shouted his name, a deep, low, guttural rumble violently shattered the oppressive silence. It was a sound like distant thunder, but it wasn't coming from the sky. It emanated from the dense, ancient trees directly across the river, and then the entire forest on that side began to shake, violently, terrifyingly. Branches snapped with explosive cracks, Leaves rustled and roared as if a hurricane was rolling directly through the woods. Yet there was no wind. I turned towards my friend, my eyes wide with terror, and he was gone. Not literally vanished into thin air, but he was sprinting, already a blurring figure far down the path, pure, unadulterated fear radiating off him, contagious as a fever. Without a second thought, pure instinct took over. I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs, breath burning in my lungs, running blindly through the woods after him, never once daring to look back at the shaking trees or the impossible footprint. That day, the peace and wonder of those familiar woods vanished forever, replaced by an unsettling dread. We told people what we'd seen and heard, trying to convey the sheer terror of that moment, but no one believed us. They dismissed it as just a story, kids imagining things after too many hours in the sun. But we both knew, deep in our bones, it was real. Something truly immense, something ancient and untamed, was out there. And that colossal footprint, that shaking forest, that profound rumble, they proved it. When I was in 3rd grade, a formative age where the line between reality and imagination often blurs, my family and I embarked on a memorable trip to a small, rustic cabin nestled deep within the awe-inspiring Redwood National Park. It was a place where the colossal, ancient trees pressed in so close, their towering forms blocking out the sun, that the night felt thick, endless, and profoundly dark. My parents shared one room with my little brother, who slept securely between them, while my older sister claimed a sleeping bag on the floor nearby. As for me, the lucky one, I slept on the pull-out couch in the living room, and for this special trip, my best friend Colin was allowed to come along and sleep there with me. That night, we found ourselves wide awake, way past our strict bedtime, fueled by the thrill of being in the wilderness and the glow of our Game Boys. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft, rhythmic clicks of buttons and our whispered chatter, punctuated by hushed giggles. I remember the gradual drift towards sleep as it became Colin's turn to play. I must have been utterly dead tired from a long, exhilarating day of hiking and exploring, because despite the game, I finally succumbed to exhaustion around 3 in the morning. That's when I felt a gentle, persistent nudge. Colin was shaking me awake, his eyes wide in the gloom. Half asleep, I mumbled, asking what in the world he wanted. He put a finger to his lips, his expression urgent, and pointed silently towards the large picture window above the couch. My drowsy eyes focused. Outside, illuminated by the pale, ethereal moonlight, we saw the old wooden swing set. It stood tall, taller than my dad, who was a respectable 5'10", but towering over that swing set, a colossal, shadowy figure, completely covered in thick, matted hair. It was impossibly dark out. The cabin was situated in a small clearing, surrounded on all sides by the dense, light-swallowing redwood forest. So the only illumination was the faint, silver glow of the moon filtering through the impenetrable canopy. I was instantly frozen, shock rooting me to the spot, every muscle tensed. I had certainly heard stories about Bigfoot, those local legends whispered around campfires, but I had never, not for a second, truly believed them. I certainly never imagined I'd see one with my own 2 eyes. The local area was renowned for sightings. The gift shop even sold tacky souvenirs covered in Bigfoot images, but this was profoundly different. This was real. We stared at it, the massive, silent figure, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or 2. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and then, in that moonlit stillness, I caught the creature's eye. It glowed faintly, a mesmerizing, intelligent spark in the deep dark. As it looked directly back at us, its gaze unwavering. After what seemed like a lifetime, it moved. It turned, its massive frame pivoting with a silent, deliberate grace, and walked slowly downhill into the dense trees. Its strides impossibly long, impossibly quiet. It was gone in mere seconds, swallowed by the ancient forest. Colin and I looked at each other, wide-eyed and silent, our hearts thrumming with an electric realization. We weren't dreaming. This was real. And somehow, in that moment, instead of the fear that should have gripped us, a strange surge of pure, unadulterated excitement washed over us. It was an incredible, awe-inspiring, unforgettable sight. A profound encounter that would forever shape our perception of the wild. We must have been utterly exhausted by the combined shock and wonder, because after that, we didn't stay up much longer, falling asleep quickly, minds buzzing. The next morning, fueled by our extraordinary secret, we rushed to tell my parents what we'd seen. They dismissed us with a kind, knowing smile, calling it a nice story, something two imaginative kids might dream up after a long day outdoors. For years after, Colin and I would joke about how we both saw Bigfoot together, that one unforgettable night in the redwoods. These childhood encounters, etched so deeply into memory, into the very fabric of who we are, make you wonder, don't they? They leave an indelible mark, prompting us to question the known, to look deeper into the shadows. Could these truly be remnants of a forgotten past, majestic beings living just beyond our sight, or something else entirely, something still evolving, something we are only just beginning to comprehend? These tales speak of creatures with immense power, primal intelligence, and a profound ancient connection to our world, challenging our comfortable understanding of what truly walks among us, unseen. They hint at a deep, knowing presence that observes, communicates, and leaves undeniable evidence of its existence. But while some encounters suggest a primal, almost familiar, intelligence, other stories defy all categorization, presenting creatures so bizarre, so utterly alien, that they might just redefine what we think we know about the natural world itself. Prepare yourselves, because the next encounters push the very boundaries of the imagination. Forget what you think you know about cryptids. What if there are things out there so strange, so utterly unlike anything we've ever imagined, that they defy all classification? We've explored the familiar terrors of the deep woods and the unsettling intelligence of humanoids. But now, prepare yourselves, because we're delving into the truly bizarre, encounters that push the very boundaries of what we understand about life on this planet. Our first story takes us to the west coast of Sweden, where a seemingly ordinary evening walk turned into a chilling encounter with something that simply shouldn't exist. It was around 5 p.m., already pitch black in mid-November, when a father and son set out for a walk in a nearby forest, just 10 minutes from civilization. No streetlights, no flashlights, just the faint glow of the moon. They walked beside a large, quiet lake. The only sound, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Near the edge, they spotted a large group of ducks, perhaps 50, calmly floating. Everything was serene, normal. And then, about 25 meters ahead, something darted across the trail. It wasn't like any animal either of them had ever seen. The creature sprinted from right to left, vanishing towards the lake in a flash. It stood about 150 centimeters tall, but it didn't run like a deer or a fox. It moved on all fours, yet its front limbs were noticeably longer than its hind legs, almost as if it were a bipedal creature forced to run in an unnatural, quadrupedal gait. Its fur or skin was beige or brown, blending into the dark woods, but its speed was terrifying, and it was utterly silent, save for the pounding of its limbs on the forest floor. The ducks on the lake reacted instantly, erupting in chaos, flying into the air, flapping wildly and screaming loudly. It was an unprecedented disturbance. Then, as if on cue, a heavy metallic smell filled the air. It was the sharp, unmistakable scent of iron and blood. Both father and son caught it instantly. The son, who works in a hospital and deals with blood regularly, had never smelled anything like this in the wild before. It was overwhelming. But what struck him most was his dad's reaction. A hardcore skeptic, a realist who grew up on a farm in the Swedish forests. He knew the local wildlife better than anyone. He was as shocked as his son, admitting he'd never seen anything with that size, shape, or speed. What could possibly move with such unnatural grace, spook an entire flock of ducks into a frenzy, and leave behind the cloying scent of blood? Was it an unknown species, a localized entity, or something even more otherworldly? The possibilities are endless, and equally terrifying. The sheer weirdness of it, forcing you to question everything you thought you knew about the natural world, is truly unsettling. Next, we travel to the wilds of northern Ontario, where a camping trip took a turn for the unsettling with tiny, unseen entities and disturbing laughter. About a decade ago, two friends, one of them a scientist, went camping. They'd caught a bunch of fish, fried some for dinner, and hung the rest in the trees to keep them fresh. As the sun set, they settled by the fire, enjoying the peaceful evening. But then, strange things started. From the dark bush, they heard the usual nighttime noises: rustling leaves, snapping twigs, probably just a squirrel or a raccoon. But then came something odd, strange, and unsettling: laughing sounds. At first, they brushed it off. But then, glancing out of the corner of his eye, the scientist saw something small. He described it as a little Spider-Man, almost like a tiny, wiry figure skittering through the underbrush. His camping partner saw it too, a little human-like figure, hunched like a cartoon dwarf. Spooked, they both bolted a few meters away from camp. When they returned, everything was eerily still, but all the fish they had hung up in the trees were gone. In just a few minutes, everything had vanished. On the surface, it doesn't sound too strange. Maybe a raccoon or a porcupine had snatched it all away. The mind plays tricks, and my buddy, a scientist by trade, is not one to get easily swept away by extraordinary explanations. But then, the story took a curious turn. Years later, researching for a dissertation in the Ontario archives, he stumbled across an interview with an early 20th century explorer, Ernest Olholtzer. Olholtzer recounted stories from his indigenous guide, O'Duke Gawan, better known as Billy McGee. McGee, who traveled with him around Lake Superior, spoke of legends among the Anishinaabe people called Mochi Fesu or Mama Grassi. These were said to be little people who not only played pranks on unsuspecting travelers, but were also known for their eerie and unsettling laugh. The chilling connection between his experience and this ancient folklore sent shivers down his spine. Could it be that the legends he heard were not just stories, but something older that still lives in those northern forests? Finally, prepare for an encounter that truly defies all known categories. From Cape Elizabeth, Maine. A couple was wandering along the edge of a secluded cove, enjoying the ocean air and the way the lighthouse beam cut through the fog. The tide was low, revealing slick rocks and ribbons of seaweed. They stopped at an old wooden observation deck that jutted out over the rocky beach. From there, the moonlight shimmered off the water, turning the ocean into liquid silver. And that's when they saw it. At first, the narrator thought it was just a pile of seaweed or driftwood, but then it moved. A small, dark figure stood alone at the shoreline, perfectly still. It was humanoid, no more than 4 feet tall, but something about its proportions was wrong. Its body was short and thin, but its head was enormous, nearly half its size, smooth and perfectly round. The moonlight danced off its surface, creating a strange, mirrored reflection that made it look almost transparent, like polished obsidian or deep black water. A cold wave of unease ran through the narrator. His girlfriend tensed beside him, her fingers digging into his arm. It wasn't just standing there, it was watching. The thing's head slowly turned in their direction, and for a split second, he thought he saw something shift inside it, like light refracting through deep water. His breath caught in his throat. Then his girlfriend screamed. The sound shattered the silence, and in an instant, the thing reacted. It jerked, almost as if startled, then sprang into motion. But it didn't run. It leapt. Without a sound, it flung itself towards the water. Its movements impossibly smooth, as if gravity barely applied to it. It didn't splash when it hit the surface. There was no thrashing, no signs of a struggle. It just disappeared beneath the waves like a stone sinking into the abyss. They stood frozen, staring down at the ocean. The water rippled slightly where it had gone under, then stilled. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Minutes passed. They waited for it to resurface, to crawl back onto the shore, to give them some kind of explanation. The cove remained empty. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, illuminating nothing but the endless black sea. What could possibly explain a creature that defied physics, a mirror-headed entity that simply dissolved into the ocean? These aren't just strange sightings. They are anomalies of the wild, challenging our very understanding of life on Earth. What do you think these bizarre entities could be? Was it an unknown species, a localized entity, or something even more otherworldly? The possibilities are endless and equally terrifying. Share your theories, and if you've heard similar legends, in the comments below. The stories end, but the questions remain. What is it about these encounters that leaves even the most grounded individuals forever changed? Their perception of reality shattered. We opened this journey with my father, a man rooted in the tangible, a seasoned woodsman who believed only in what he could see, hear, and touch. Yet, a chilling encounter in the Missouri woods, an inexplicable loss of time, and the unnerving experience of being stalked by something that was not animal, not human, left him pale, trembling, and forever changed. He never spoke of it easily, and when he did, it was with the quiet certainty of someone who had seen the veil between worlds torn, if only for a few terrifying moments. That same profound shift, that shattering of preconceived notions, echoes through every story we've heard tonight. Think of the unnatural silence that preceded so many of these encounters, the air growing heavy, the world holding its breath, as if something immense was pressing down on the natural soundscape. We heard it in the Missouri woods, silencing a pack of seasoned hounds, in the Grand Tetons, where even the buzzing of flies ceased, and in Shiprock, where the desert's vibrant nightlife fell still at the whistle of the unknown. Then there's the element of lost time, a phenomenon so unsettlingly common in these narratives. My father and his friend, experienced hunters, lost hours in the woods, unable to account for the gap. Was it a trick of the mind, a disorientation induced by extreme fear, or something far more sinister, an ability of these entities to manipulate perception, perhaps even time itself? The creatures themselves defy easy categorization. They are not merely aggressive animals. Their behavior is consistently non-animalistic. The Sir Scotch entity in the Pacific Northwest accepted an offering, a deliberate act of interaction. The Utah creature, 8 feet tall and covered in hair, made vocalizations that sounded like a garbled, purposeful language, and even mimicked human attempts to communicate back. These aren't just apex predators. They exhibit an intelligence that chills to the bone, suggesting a knowing, almost ancient presence. Their movements are frequently described as unnatural, the tall, armless figure in the Rockies that shifted rather than stepped. The coastal dog-like creature that sat down after every inching step, its shoulders wrong, its gait twisted, the Swedish forest anomaly that moved on all fours with front limbs longer than its hind, a bipedal creature forced to run like an animal. And then there are the eyes, the glowing yellow eyes of the coastal creature, the faintly glowing eyes of the redwood Bigfoot that made direct eye contact. These aren't the eyes of a bear or a deer. They speak of an awareness, a deliberate observation, a sense of being watched that lingers long after the creature has vanished. From the Siberian Yeti that paced on a dugout roof, vibrating the very ground beneath the soldiers, to the bizarre mochi fesu, tiny spider-men with unsettling laughter stealing fish, to the truly alien creature with the huge, mirrored head that vanished into the waters of Cape Elizabeth. These encounters push the boundaries of what we understand about life on Earth. They are anomalies of the wild, defying conventional understanding and forcing us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that our maps of the natural world are incomplete, perhaps even profoundly wrong. So, what are these things? Are they undiscovered species? Remnants of a forgotten evolutionary branch that has managed to avoid human detection for millennia? Are they interdimensional travelers, slipping between planes of existence, leaving behind only glimpses and shattered nerves? Are they localized entities, unique to specific areas, or perhaps even expressions of a sentient wilderness itself? Or is it all misidentification, the human mind playing tricks, exaggerating shadows and sounds into monstrous forms? What do you believe is out there? Have you ever had an encounter that left you questioning everything you thought you knew? These stories, and countless others like them, serve as a stark reminder that even in our modern, mapped-out world, genuine mysteries lurk just beyond the tree line, in the silent depths of the forest, or even in the reflections of an unknown entity's eyes. They challenge us to reconsider our place in the natural order and to acknowledge that there are forces, intelligences, and creatures that operate outside our understanding, leaving behind only lingering echoes and profound questions. If these stories resonated with you, if they sparked a flicker of recognition or a shiver of fear, then you're part of a community fascinated by the unseen, the unexplained, and the undeniably real. Join the conversation in the comments below. Share your theories, your own experiences, and what you think these creatures truly are. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who might find it chilling, and subscribe to the channel for more dives into the darkness. Your support helps us continue to explore the terrifying truths that hide in plain sight. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the greatest fear isn't what you see, but what you can't see, lurking just beyond the edge of your perception. Good night, if you're still awake. Thank you for braving the dark with us tonight on Midnight Whispers. If these stories stirred something in you, a chill, a memory, a shadow, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more true horrors, and ring the bell so you never miss a whisper from the night. Sleep tight, if you can.